Hey, how's it going? I'm Rakaba18. Today we're going to be talking about gear slots and explosives, specifically within Rainbow Six Extraction. With each operator, you get access to all of these explosives as you progress. This is going to mostly focus on max level. Once you've unlocked all of the different tech. And we're going to do a separate video on gear slots, which include things like explosive belts, revive kits. All that stuff's going to be a separate video. Otherwise, this gets a little too complicated. There are a couple things to keep in mind here. One, you're going to automatically have access to all of these explosives, no matter the operator. No one operator gets a specific type or anything like that. So what you want to kind of remember when it comes to explosives is that it's really important which one you choose, because you only have access to a limited selection and a limited number of choices in terms of how you play this game. There are tons of explosive options, but the one that you choose is going to make a huge difference in how you operate in the game. Now, there are a couple principles that I will use to guide what I talk about here. We're going to go over some of my favorite choices in this menu walkthrough here, and then I'm going to show you examples of how each grenade can be used in the game. So you'll see little clips of in-game footage of how they're utilized. So the biggest tip that I can give you in terms of selecting your gear explosives is, what operator are you using? So this is a great example, and I talk about this in my in-depth guide with Lion. If you are bringing Lion, you don't really need to bring vapor devices, scan grenades, or scan mines. The amount of intelligence that you're going to gather based on utilizing those specific types of mines is going to be minimal compared to, like, let's say bringing C4 or bringing a field wall to stop projectiles. Those kinds of things are going to really make a difference, and Lion is the best example of that. And we'll talk about this more in the gear slot video. But you also don't want to bring a Recon drone just because you're already getting a Recon drone when you bring Lion, and you don't really need to do that. So that's one of the most important things to keep in mind with regard to what explosive you choose. If your operator already has that, you can make a case in some ways for expanding on that and making it even better. But you can also make a case for then choosing something different, like a field wall with Zofia, since she's already got impact grenades or stun grenades. So you can bring field walls to protect your team from projectiles. So what you are using as an operator is going to make a huge difference in what explosive you use. The other thing to keep in mind is your play style. If you are a new player and you're learning the game, there's going to be certain things that are much more useful, like paralysis grenades. If you're really, really good at being loud and controlling entire large rooms, cells are probably going to be your best bet. If you're trying to defend objectives, field walls are going to make a huge difference. So who you are in terms of your player, in terms of your player skill, in terms of where you are in the game and what you like to do and how you prefer to play, is going to make a huge difference in what you choose. And then 3, the setup of your team is going to also make a difference. Much like if you're playing Lion, you're not going to need scan mines. If you have a Lion on your team, scan mines are going to be just as useless, in my opinion. Now, there's one small example where they can, you can scan cloaked Archeans, but it doesn't, in my personal opinion, make that big of a difference unless you are trying to do like solo challenge runs, like some of the members of my community do. Those are ways in which you can really get through a solo maelstrom, but there's such a small niche way in which you would need to do that I don't see it as viable for the vast majority of people. So the setup of your team is really going to be important, and by extension, what you're trying to accomplish. If you're doing it in like a group critical run where everything is the objective defense, field walls are going to be great. Especially on critical, because you're going to end up with tons of tormentors and apexes and spikers. You're going to want to try to block some of those projectiles. So keep those things in mind as you are learning and growing in the game. Those are the things that are going to really dictate what choices you make. So let's talk about a couple of what I would consider the top tier choices for grenades, and then we'll show you some in-game footage for each of them so you can decide for yourself. My personal favorite is the paralysis grenade. I almost always default to this. I have been leaning more towards some other choices in certain circumstances and depending on the team build. But paralysis grenades are almost always a great bet, especially as you're learning and growing the game. Prior to that, you can use like stun grenades or smoke grenades as an alternative. to sort of accomplish some of the same things. And I will tell you the ways in which you'll use those in the in-game footage here in just a minute. I also think field walls are top tier, especially in some of the late game Maelstrom, in the deep Maelstrom runs where like serial scan is number 9 and you're dealing with 6 Apex spawns. It could really, really make a huge difference because for one, you're blocking all the projectiles and you can shoot through them, so they can't shoot you, you can shoot them. It just makes a huge difference on defensive objectives, incursions, and stuff like that. Nitro cells or frag grenades are really, really top tier for me, especially if I'm going with a more loud and aggressive team build. So those are the ones that I would go with in terms of offensive orientation. You can make a case for stun grenades, and then everything else kind of falls off from there. There's different circumstances in which you're going to use these in different ways. I will go ahead and say for the record that I think glue grenades are the worst grenade in the entire game. If I'm going to slow down an Archean, I would much rather, blow them up with a nitro cell. But, and especially here's one of my biggest complaints. Like, look at glue grenades. You get 3 of those to slow them down, or you get 3 of these to blow them up. In my opinion, they're going to have to up the number of defensive-oriented grenades and make them a little bit better to make them a little bit easier to compete with. Nitro cells, you get 2 of them, but this will blow up an entire room versus this is just going to slow them down. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And then if you look at like impact grenades, you even get 4 of those, which are probably better than glue grenades. So I don't know. Some of the choices they've made in terms of the number that you get isn't great. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of these in-game footages. We're going to go one by one through all of these, and I will tell you and show you what they look like. All right, here we are on Monolith Gardens. We're going to do a couple of important points here, and don't mind me, I'll be killing Archeans throughout this video because I have alerted a few things, but that's no problem. So we're going to start by using smoke grenades, and I'm going to demonstrate ways that you can extend out and make smoke grenades even better on operators that sort of already have them. So here we are with Capitao, who has smoke bolts as part of his ultimate ability, so you can utilize smoke bolts in the same way that you would a grenade. And you will start with, without the gear up slot and without an explosive belt, you will start with 3 smoke grenades, and then for every box you will pick up 3 more. Those get exponentially more as you gear up or as you have a belt, but keep that in mind. All right, so here's how a basic way to utilize a smoke grenade. So let's say, for example, there's a bunch of Archeans right there, and you need to get from where you are, which is hiding right here, not alerting them, into that door. So you just chuck out a smoke grenade. It's going to block their line of vision after a couple of seconds. Now, keep in mind, it does take a second to deploy, whereas his venom bolts are going to, and his smoke bolts are going to go out instantly. So then you've blocked their line of sight. You can come across over here. Your whole team can come across, and you can shut the door. So it's a great way to block vision. Keep in mind, too, that they will investigate noise, so they will go and look to see what that noise was, but they're not going to find you, and so they're therefore not going to howl necessarily. Now, if they see you, or if you stand around through the smoke and it disappears, then they see you, then they will howl. So that you want to use them as a way to deter, and then one other example we'll show you here. So this guy's going to howl, but watch how it sort of disorients him a little bit, and then we can take him down. So especially early on in the game, you can use these as a way to prevent howls, to disorient your teammate or your enemies a little bit. So he isn't going to howl because it disoriented him. I can then take him down. Boom. So they become an alternative early on in the game to paralysis grenades, and then I can back off, take a different path, and they no longer need to worry about seeing me. You can also cover objectives with these. Like, let's say we're doing a sabotage tower right here. I can cover the entire area with smoke grenades or serial scan, and boom, we've finished it before they see me. Moving on to the next one. You can cover rescue targets with these. Run in and grab them out, or take down a bunch of them. Don't recommend that specific way unless you've mastered it, because you can really get that. They can go sideways really quickly if you're not careful. But those are ways in which some of the basic ways you'll use smoke grenades. So they're a decent option. I would give these a mid-tier to upper-tier grade, and they are really useful for operators that you are already utilizing to control lines of sight and to block vision, such as Capitao or smoke. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next grenade here in game, and we'll talk more about it. All right, here we are in game with Zofia. As I did in the Capitao demonstration with the smoke grenades, we're also going to talk about next impact grenades. You can choose to use these in this specific way, but I almost never bring impact grenades personally because I think there are other options. But I'm going to demonstrate what they do anyway. You start with 4 inexplicably. I don't know why you start with 4 of those, and we'll talk about more of that here in just a second. So they will essentially immediately eviscerate certain enemies. And they work very similar to her impact grenade on her ultimate. She gets both impact and stun that recharge, which is also inexplicable, but that's a different story. So you start with 4 of these, and as you chuck them, they will knock back and eviscerate certain enemies. 2 of them will automatically destroy an enemy. Certain lower level enemies like these breachers will automatically be eviscerated. But most everything else is going to be a impact, which will knock them over. And then if you throw another one, it will destroy them. So past grunts and spikers, they will only knock things back. They're not going to do enough damage to kill anything. You'd have to chuck like 6 or 7 of them. There's a point at which you could probably kill them with the damage. But by the time that happens, you're going to be out of grenades. So let's demonstrate then as an example just how closely related her ultimate is. Let's find another Archie over here somewhere without alerting these nests. They will also remove blinding spores, by the way, just so you know, and they'll create holes in the wall. So there's a way in which you can use them with sledge in that way, for example. So let's demonstrate here. That's also an impact grenade, and you can see it takes them down. The second one will stun, and then we can shoot them. So using Zofia in this way will expand her kit. I personally think because she already has them, there's better alternative options for you. And I think that for the most part, the impact grenades are going to be lower tier, especially later in the game. There's niche situations in which you're going to want to stun them back, get them away from you. Like let's say you're being rushed by 15 Archeans right here. You can chuck an impact grenade, knock them all back. They're all going to be disoriented for a second, and then you'll buy yourself some time. That's really useful when you're reloading an LMG or if you're dealing with swarms or things like that. But for the most part, this one is going to be a lower tier option, one that I don't recommend, especially as you're getting further into the deep Maelstrom runs and stuff like that. They're going to be better options for you. So let's talk about a different one here in just a second, and we'll look at some of the in-game footage for that. All right, here we are with Finka on scan, or on police station. We're bringing scan mines. Words are hard. So here I'm going to demonstrate a brief and explanatory video on scan mines, excuse me. So we're going to pull them out and deploy them, and as you can see, they take a moment to deploy, but anything within this range that runs through is going to be automatically scanned. Keep in mind they are destructible, so they're going to be targeted and destroyed by enemies. And then let's say, for example, we want to place one over here. The primary disadvantage to these is that you have to deploy them prior to being rushed because they're, you know, their usefulness is about finding enemies before they get to you. So let's say we're defending a sabotage here. You can make a case for, like, they will scan, by the way, cloaked Archeans. So if a cloaked Archean is rushing in, you can't really see them. You can they'll run through that and see it, and your team will be able to get that intel. I personally almost never use scan grenades. The only time I really used them was in Spillover for the Crisis event because of the tons and tons of cloaked Archeans that you had to deal with. You can place them out further away. Like let's say, for example, we're concerned about things running through here. We'll get this guy's attention. Then you can see that as they run through, it'll give you intel. And if there are additional ones that run through, they'll give you intel. So there's ways in which they're super useful, but it's very, very niche. And unless you're dealing with cloaked Archeans, unless you really desperately need intel, I can't really make a case for them. As you can see, we got another scan there. Because for the most part, you're going to need to... You can either bring a Recon drone, and it'll do a better job finding things, with the exception of cloaked Archeans. Or Lion will do a great job. You know, some of the more intelligence gathering ops will do a good job of giving you intel that you need. And they take a moment to deploy. Inexplicably here too, you only get 3 of them. You only get 3 frag grenades, which is understandable, but to have 3 of these completely defensively oriented ones does not make any sense to me. And I hope that they fix that at some point. But this is a lower tier option, in my opinion, one that I don't think most people will find very useful. You're almost never going to see them in the Maelstrom just simply because they are too niche. And candidly, later on, you're going to get a grenade that does this a little bit better anyway. So we'll talk about that when we get to it. But this is one that I almost never use. I don't think you'll probably find it useful either. So don't bring them. All right, here we are with Gridlock. This is a great example of an underrated way in which you can make an operator that does something really well even better with a grenade. And so here we are with Gridlock, and we have a Claymore. We brought a Claymore this time. So Gridlock is a great area lockdown defender. We're going to throw out our Gridlock stingers in different spots, and then we are going to pair those with Claymores. So as you can see here, you have to pull them out, and they take a moment to deploy. So then we have a Claymore. These grid stingers will explode on explosive. So like, let's say, for example, a breacher is running through here. He runs into this Claymore. Boom. It's only going to explode once, and then it will also explode the grid stingers because you're dealing with, one, the explosive from the Claymore, the bloater or the breacher, and then the stingers themselves. So that is a way in which you're going to do a ton of damage. Super fun on wall-to-wall, by the way, if you're looking for a fun little goofy way to use them. But this is an example of a way in which Gridlock can lock down even more of an area. We can put points of interest areas, and good luck to any single Archean that's trying to get through all of that. By the time they get through all of that, they're probably dead, regardless of whether they're an Apex, a Protean, whatever it may be. So this is a very niche example, but it's a way in which this is how I would use Claymores, is a defense point if you're trying to defend a sabotage tower. Now, keep in mind, they are useful in more offensive-oriented ways, but you have to be very good at placing them quickly. And I don't really recommend it because there's probably better options like C4 or Nitro cells and frag grenades. But in terms of locking down areas, these are really great. We're also going to see some of this with arc mines here in a little bit as we do footage of that. But that's this is sort of a mid to upper tier option if you're doing an incursion on critical, or you're trying to defend a solo sabotage. A lot of these are going to save your life and prevent you from needing to even shoot anything. So that's how I would use them. Let's take a look at the next grenade for you. All right, we have IQ here, and we have paired her up with a stun grenade, and this is one of the better early game options, and this is going to demonstrate a little bit of a theme here. You only get 3 of them as a baseline. Gear up and explosive belts are going to change that. As you can see, we brought an explosive belt here where we get double the number. I don't know why you only get 3 of these, but also only get 3 impact or 3 explosive grenades, but then impact is also 4. It's just very confusing, some of the choices they made in terms of the number of grenades that you get. With these more defensive-oriented ones, I think you should get at least 2 or 3 more than a explosive or offensive-oriented one. But that's a different story. I just like to complain a little bit about that. So stun grenades are great early on in the game if you have not yet unlocked paralysis grenades. This is another little bit of a theme. There are certain explosives and then gear slots that are going to be good at certain points in progression, and then eventually they're going to become sort of obsolete because of a better upgrade. The biggest example you'll see in the gear video that I'll do next is that there is a drone and then an XR drone, and the XR drone basically essentially directly replaces the regular drone. This is the case with stun grenades and with impact grenades, in my opinion. Stun grenades are really great if you don't want to use smoke grenades early on in the game to complete objectives like biopsy and things like that. They're just, they're essentially, as the name indicates, they are stun grenades. So I'm going to demonstrate this they make a ton of noise, by the way. So be very careful with them. They will alert a lot of Archeans. Same with paralysis grenades as well. But you throw them out, and then 2.5 seconds later, it's going to go off. So the thing to keep in mind is that they are not instant. And this is a good example we'll demonstrate on this gentleman here. If he sees me and comes rushing at me and alerts, this will stop a howl, but it's not going to do it instantly. Watch. Now you're stunned, but by the time that's gone off, they've already howled and they're already starting to shoot me. So you want to remember that as you're using these, that you want to throw them and anticipate using them prior to needing to use them. Because if you are relying on them to stop howls or to prevent yourself from taking damage, you can get into a little bit of trouble there. So they're great options early on in the game, even later in the game, truthfully. If you just like stuns, they're pretty good. I think Paralysis is a direct replacement for them, but that's basically how you would use them, is just run up, stun them, utilize them in a way that is going to prevent you from taking damage or from howls. So let's take a look at another grenade here, and I'll demonstrate that in-game for you. All right, here we are with Jaeger. We have what I would say is the single worst grenade in the entire game. One grenade has to be the worst one, just by nature of rankings. You would prefer most of the time that at least some of them had some like niche use. But truthfully, with glue grenades, let me finish taking care of these, hold on. With glue grenades, there's almost always a circumstance in which you're going to, even if you need to use them, even if there is a niche moment in which they're going to be useful, there's probably something that's going to do a better job of helping you manage that situation, in my opinion. So just as a default, I would recommend that you don't use these, don't get used to using them until they get buffed or until you get some sort of change with them. I just don't find them useful. And if you like them, good for you, but I think they're awful. And here's why. So let's find some bad guys here. You never find one when you need one. So we're going to throw this down and watch. It's going to effectively slow their movement speed down quite significantly. So these effectively act like a temporary version of Gridlock's track stingers, except they don't do damage. And they're only going to last a couple of seconds. So as you can see, we're still in trouble and we're out of grenades. So the usefulness of them is very, very minor, and they're only going to temporarily slow things. You only get 3 of them, and truthfully, it's going to wear out before they're before you can even blink your eye. So I don't recommend using them. Don't bring them. Bring something else. All right, here we are in game with Hibana. I like to bring Frags with Hibana here for one specific reason. She is an explosive class, one of the best in the game at offense. Her ult is insane, as we've talked about in her in-depth guide. Look for that in a different video. I will link to that in the description below. The main reason I like to bring her Frags or C4, which we'll do on another operator as well, I would say Fuse and Hibana are probably going to make the most use of frag grenades, but you can honestly make a case for frags with any operator. Now, a couple of basic tips here to show you is that when you chuck your frag grenade, it's going to take a good bit of time to detonate, but if you hold it and cook it, it's going to detonate much faster. So keep in mind that the longer that you cook it, and you can see my reticle there, if you hold it until that reticle starts to blink really, really fast, it's going to detonate. So you can become kind of your own little walking frag grenade, and it's not going to do any damage to you or to your team, unless you're playing in veteran mode. That is one of the key points of interest that you're going to want to remember. Now, if you're going to bring frag grenades, assuming that you have an operator that is more experienced, or you're dealing with gear up and that kind of thing, you're going to want to bring a belt, because the belt will maximize the number of frags that you can bring to the table, and you're going to want to try to utilize them in special ways. So you can anticipate that there are enemies that are going to need to be blown up, like let's say right there. You can just chuck one over there, it'll start to blink and blow up, and then you can hold and cook one and throw it over that direction. You can use your Hibana's ult to breach and break doors, chuck some in there, chuck some in there. So you want to sort of like, this is a really loud option and one that's going to alert the entire subzone. So I don't recommend it on nest tracking because it does not discriminate against specific enemy types. If you don't want the nest to go boom, don't go boom. And so you want to kind of use this in a more experienced way. There are ways that low-level ops and people that are learning the game can utilize them. It's just going to take a little bit of practice because being loud in this game is much harder than it is to be quiet. Pulling off a full zone alert is much more difficult than pulling off a fully stealth run. So just keep that in mind, and let's go ahead and take a look at the next gear slot here. All right, here we are in an incursion with Gridlock. We are going to use and demonstrate how to utilize field walls in the best way possible. Gridlock does have gear up, and we brought a belt, so we're doubling up the number of with that belt, we're doubling up the number of grenades that we have, and she has gear up, so she gets 1 extra for each of those. And then keep in mind, as you use those throughout the entire subzone, anytime you pick up a react tech box, that's going to also give you 4 instead of 3. No, excuse me, it's going to give you 7 instead of 3. So that's the power of the explosive belt. It is one of the best gear slots in the entire game. We'll talk about that in another video, though. This is more about field wall. And so field wall is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated options in terms of grenades and explosives. This is one that you're going to want to use in a very defensive-oriented position. If you're trying to defend, let's say, as a sabotage tower here, you've got 3 apexes out on the field, you've got some tormentors running around. Pretty simple little solution to deal with all of their little projectiles. These will block any and all projectiles for an unlimited amount of time, as long as they're up. Now, unlimited amount of time meaning as long as they're up. So there's no limit to the damage they can absorb. There is a limit in terms of how long they last, however. So keep that in mind as you're utilizing these. You want to throw them down while you're defending, not in anticipation of defending. So like, let's say we're defending these towers. You've got a couple more. You can chuck in some more. And these are going to block any projectiles from spikers, tormentors, you name it. Apexes, any kind of projectile in the game, you can automatically block it. Now, crucially, you can also shoot through them. So any bullets that you or your team shoot will not block these. So if there's an apex right there and it's shooting its projectile, it's going to absorb the projectile, and then you can shoot through on the other side so that you can do damage to them. It's very, very important to remember that. And on veteran mode, for example, you can do damage to your team through those. So be careful. Don't shoot your teammates. And this is how you're going to want to utilize field walls. They're really, really powerful on like serial scan or sabotage, and even on objectives like elite, where you're hunting an elite tormentor, for example, or an elite apex, and he's absolutely frying your team. Throw out some field walls, they'll absorb those, and you'll be fine. And you'll be able to shoot and do damage without having to worry about other projectiles. So this is, in my opinion, a top tier objective defense option, especially when it's paired with an operator like Gridlock or Smoke, who is already there because you need them to help you defend. Jaeger's another great option, and they're even better when you match them up with gear slots like explosive belts, or with operators who have explosive gear up as well. So that is field wall. Let's go ahead and talk about the next one here and look at some footage. All right, here we are with Vigil. This is going to be a guide on scan grenades. So scan grenades are really good for one specific reason. So there's a little bit of a niche that these sit in, and I actually think they fill that niche pretty well. And so I'm happy to have these. I sometimes use them in this specific way, and I recommend that this is how you use them. So in an example where you do not have Pulse or Lion, or to a lesser degree IQ, and if you don't really feel like bringing a XR Recon drone, this is going to be a great option for you. These are scan grenades, which are slightly different than scan mines, which are a deployable. We talked about those a little bit ago in the video, which are deployable mines that will scan anything within range. These are going to be basically like grenades that do something of the same thing, except that these will detect cloaked Archaeans as well. So the scan mines do detect cloaked Archaeans, but they have to run through it. Whereas with these, you can throw them up against a wall or into an area, and they will automatically scan Archaeans. So keep in mind that that specific part of it, where they'll scan Archaeans, gives you very, very valuable intel. So in an example, like you're doing a solo critical mission, or you're doing a mission with a ton of cloaked Archaeans, and let's say there's a decontamination, subzone 9, where you need to find all these cloaked Archaeans, or whatever it may be. That specific part of it is what cloaked are the scan mines or grenades are going to help you with the most. So let's demonstrate real quick here for you. You chuck them, and anything in range, including nests, are going to be scanned automatically within range. That's why they're so much better. They're a direct like-for-like replacement from the scan mines. Now, there are no cloaked Archaeans on this particular map, but I'll demonstrate. You can even throw them against that wall, and anything within that range is going to automatically be detected. It doesn't make a ton of noise, so it's also not going to alert anything. So those are really, really good options for you if you're doing solo runs and you need as much intel as possible. And it's going to be sort of best paired with solo classes, with intel needs, with operators that are more oriented around gathering intelligence. Like, let's say you're using Pulse, but you need to get some intel. So you can get all the intel you want on Nest, but you need some intel on where Archeans are, particularly if they are cloaked. You're going to get some great information from those. So they're best paired in that direct way, and they're going to fill that very specific niche. So let's go ahead and take a look at these next grenades, and we'll show you some in-game footage on the next one. All right, here we are in the incursion with Mr. Fuse. He is an explosives expert. I brought a belt, and we brought nitro cells this time. So nitro cells, you're only going to get 2, which is the fewest that you will get for anyone or any explosive in the entire game, because they're quite good. C4, aka nitro cells, are probably the top option for really aggressive, really high skill players. And so you're going to want to remember with nitro cells, just like with frag grenades that we did a little bit ago, this is going to be a loud option, and it's going to be hard to master how to perfect this. But for the most part, you kind of want to gear these much like the same way you would if you're learning. You want to match them up with players that are going to go loud anyway. So like Fuse, you can use his alt. Let's just show a demonstration here. Use his alt. Open the door. Boom. Anything left after that is dead. Most of the time, that's going to kill everything in the game, those 2 actions, including Proteans. You're mostly going to kill everything by doing that. There may be a few things that survive here and there, but for the most part, that's going to be instant death. Now, a couple of basic tips, too, for you is with C4 is you can't throw them as far as you can throw fragmentation grenades, and you don't get as many of them. The damage is higher, and the range is about the same. So you're going to do more damage with a nitro cell than you would with a frag, and they are not automatically going to detonate. So you can place them in defensive positions, explode them. There is something what I would call like a little bit of a delay, called like a little bit of a global cooldown on this. So you can't chuck it and instantly detonate it. It takes it a second for the animation to work through. So you're not going to be able to just instantly chuck it and blow it up. It takes just a second. Whereas with frag grenades, you can cook them, chuck them, and they'll go boom, like that. So just keep that in mind as you're utilizing these. A couple of other tips that I'll give you is that you can use them very offensively, like that. Or you can, let's say we're doing a sabotage tower, you can set them in anticipatory positions, like let's say right here, and then as something runs by, blow it up. So you can use them in a way that they are essentially walking explosives, or you can utilize them as a defensive point holder. So just use those in those 2 ways. I tend to match these with a explosive belt, because otherwise you only get a few of them. And then with an explosive belt, instead of 2, for example, and especially if they have gear up, with an explosive belt and gear up, you'll bring 5 instead of 2. And so it more than doubles how many you get. And then for every box that you get, you're going to get 5 of them again. So in an incursion where you're using these, you want to give them to, you want to give React Tech boxes to teammates that have those perks and have that gear slot available, so that you're maximizing the utility of them. And you just kind of want to communicate and coordinate that with your team. The only other thing that I will indicate here with the C4 is that the damage does not have diminishing returns, meaning anything inside of that circle is going to take damage. It's not going to diminish based on how many enemies it hits. And so it is an incredibly effective way to clear an entire room, especially when paired with like gridlock stingers that blow up because of bloaters. So if you deal with, a breacher, a bloater, and then everything is exploding in one range, it's going to do additional stacking damage, and everything's just going to go boom. And it's a really cool, fun way to destroy an entire room. So that is Nitro Cell, probably one of the top choices for most of the really good players in this game. I tend to match them up with offensive loud characters like Hibana or Fuse. Hibana is really fun with these, by the way. So, all right, that is C4. Let's talk about the next one here. All right, here we are in game with Doc. This is going to be a little bit of a talk through on paralysis grenades. Now, I'm going to go ahead and preface this. There's a lot to get to with paralysis grenades, so bear with me while we get a little bit technical here. Paralysis grenades are going to be a top tier option no matter regardless of the circumstances. They're one of the best grenades, if not, some would argue the best grenade in the entire game, particularly for players that are learning the game or trying to be quiet and stealthy rather than loud and aggressive. Now, I hear some of you say nitro cells and frag grenades can be used in a stealthy way. You just have to know how to do it. You're right. But for the most part, 90% of the community and 90% of players in this game are going to end up wanting to do paralysis grenades as their quiet option because they're just not as good as you. And that's okay. But let's remember, paralysis grenades are going to be sort of a direct replacement for stun grenades, in my opinion, for one specific reason. One, they impact immediately. And then two, the stun tends to last a little bit longer. So they will essentially freeze a Archean in place and they become paralyzed so that you can run up and do whatever it is you need to do, whether that's biopsy, whether that's kill them or take them down so they don't howl. Whatever the case is, they're going to probably solve whatever problem you're having. So paralysis grenades are going to be the best option for almost everyone in almost every circumstance. But let's talk about some specific circumstances in which I think they're best utilized. So if we're going to min and max and make sure that we're using the best option at the best time, here are a couple of tips for you. One, remember that they make a ton of noise. They're one of the loudest grenades in the entire game. So just because you're utilizing them does not mean it's going to be perfectly stealthy. Two, the stun doesn't last forever. And so you're going to want to utilize them in a circumstance where it's sort of like an oh shit button, but it can also cause more problems to cascade. So don't utilize them if in a scenario, I mean, you can technically. So like, let's say for example, there are 3 Archeans right here. You throw your stun grenade, shoot 2 of them, and then run up and take one of them down. One of the mistakes that I tend to make, and everybody tends to make this mistake, is there's 3 Archeans here. You stun them, run up and take them down. By the time that animation is over, all 3 of these guys are unstunned, and then one of them is at least going to howl. So that is one very, very important tip for you is do your shooting first, throw the stun, shoot some more, and then run up and take them out. Don't try to... The most that you're ever going to get through on one paralysis grenade is 2 takedowns, and that's kind of pushing it. That's if you're really cooking, if you're like right next to them. So remember that things around it, and after the stun is over, it's going to probably result in a howl or some damage anyway. Tip number 2 that I will give you is that these are the number 1 way to deal with smashers, in my opinion, because their carapace is basically front facing. If you throw a paralysis grenade, it's going to allow you to then run around it and hit them with a takedown. The other tip as it relates to that, a sub tip, is don't throw, like let's say there's a smasher all the way over there. Don't chuck your C4 or your paralysis grenade here, chuck it here so that you're closer to your target. Don't do it when they're in a doorway so that you can't get through. Oops, hold on, let me take this guy out. So we're not dealing with issues here. Well, we've howled, so no worries. But let's kind of run around and I'll give you some more tips. So like let's say for example we're walking through a skinny doorway like this and there's a smasher. If you stun it, you're not going to be able to run through here to get to the other side of it. So you want to do it in a way in which you can get to where your target is to do the takedown, especially important with smashers. Another sub tip there is don't get too close to them when the stun's about to run out because you will take damage, I promise. One of the mistakes I make, and I see a lot of people make, is they'll stun, take a second to get to the target, and then by the time they're turned around to get to it, the target is already unstunned and they're taking damage, and then it results in immediate failure. So let's go up to the sub zone here so that I can get to safety, and then we'll talk some more. This is a great example, by the way. This is also a way that you can use them as an escape. If you're being surrounded, you can sort of just throw one down and then use it to escape. Let's grab some more of these real quick and then get in here. One of the ways that I will also, one of the other tips that I will give you, and this gets into a little bit of a more advanced tip for you, is that with paralysis grenades, I think they're personally at the top tier, but I think they're also best utilized with classes that don't have stuns. Now, you can make the case that like Ella, Nomad, Sledge, all of the stun classes are going to benefit from having extra stuns. But I also think that there's a case to be, the stronger case in my opinion, and there's going to be varying opinions on this, is that with Ella, she has a rechargeable paralysis grenade essentially every time she needs one. So I would more likely bring a C4 or a field wall or something that my team needs in addition to that rechargeable stun grenade, so that I'm not having to waste that gear slot or that explosive slot. So just keep that in mind. There are certain operators that are going to benefit from these better than others, but almost everyone's going to benefit from them. There's like little marginal ways in which you can improve that. I tend to personally recommend that you use them with classes that are fragile, like Vigil, or IQ, or support classes where you're going to be more playing a passive backline role to help your team. There's just going to be ways in which that's going to be beneficial to you, and you're going to maximize the use of them. Another thing to keep in mind with paralysis grenades is that you only get 3 of them. And I think that this is one of the things that I want them to tweak about paralysis grenades is if you only get 3 frag grenades, that's way better than 3 paralysis grenades. Paralysis doesn't do anything but stun the target. It doesn't make the target disappear. So in my opinion, you should get more paralysis grenades than you do frag grenades. You see that you get less C4 than you do paralysis, and so I think that the inverse should be true, but that's just my personal opinion. All right, so this is one of my favorite grenades, one that almost everyone's going to use, particularly as you're using the game, so I hope these tips help you out. Let's take a look at the last couple of grenades, and then we will do a video here shortly on some gear slots. All right, here we are in game, and this is the final grenade in the entire game at the timing of this video. As they update new ones, I will probably talk about those specific grenades, and you'll see videos about that. As they introduce new gear and stuff, we'll also do videos on those. One thing I will mention to you is that this is one of the most misunderstood grenades in the entire game. In my opinion, it is underutilized just a little bit, but it's also probably one of the worst grenades. There's a very, very specific niche for this one, and that's why you probably never see it used. It's sort of useless if you use it in any other way, but it's sort of an alternative to a scan mine or a scan grenade. And in a way, you can sort of think of it as an alternative to both of those. I personally think scan mines are much more useful, but this is a way that you can utilize these. So what is a Recon Vapor grenade? So essentially, you're going to throw it, and then after a second or two, it's going to detonate, and then it's going to create a large cloud of smoke that will detect any cloaked Archeans in range, and that includes through walls as well. So if you chucked it in there, you're going to see in that area any cloaked Archeans, any Archeans. It's going to reveal them for you. Now, what's different about this versus scan grenades and scan mines is that this lasts 45 seconds, and so it's going to be a long-term solution for you. Now, let's say we're pairing it up with Alibi for one specific reason. So anything that runs up and attacks my Alibi drone here is going to be scanned. And so you're going to get temporary intel regardless of whether they're cloaked or not. Right there, boom, they're giving me intel. But let's say we're doing serial scan. This is the only way I would ever use these, is if I have an Alibi drone here, I have them like covered all over this area. For whatever reason, I've only thrown them there. Let's pretend that one actually deployed. And then all I need is intel on there. So I'm doing that serial scan there, and I don't have any way to, and I'm doing a solo critical run or a Maelstrom run or whatever it is. And I need intel if there are cloaked Archeans or if there are Archeans that are going to rush over here. So we throw that there. We come on over here and we stand. And let's say we want, additional information. We want some information. We can bounce them off that wall. And then anything that runs through that or runs through that for 45 seconds while I'm doing serial scan or sabotage or an objective defense is going to give me intel. Bear with me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. So much talking. So that's going to provide you additional intelligence in a very, very niche way. It's about the only way that I see them useful, and truthfully, you could probably make a case that scan grenades are better because you get more of them, and they're going to reveal cloaked Archeans too. So all you'd have to do is put either an Alibi drone over there, bring in a cloaked grenade in or something, and it's going to give you more intel. And I just think it's a very much a better version of this. And I think this grenade is going to need a rework. I think that it's one of the least utilized ones alongside maybe glue grenades, except that I think this one's like slightly better than glue grenades. So it's one of the worst ones in the game. I'm not sure why it's added, truthfully. It feels like a unnecessary grenade. I can think of about 5 or 6 other ideas for grenades that I think should have been in the game other than this one. But there it is, in case you decide that you want to use it in that specific way. So let me know what you think of this video in the comments below. What did I get wrong? If there's anything I missed or didn't talk about, please let me know in the comments below so people have that information. If you have made it this far in the video, I appreciate your support in watching this video. Hope you learned something. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free, and it helps me out, makes my day, and it makes me smile. So I will see you again for the next video, which will probably be either an in-depth guide on an operator or a in-depth guide for the gear slot, which is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. So let's get into that, and I hope to see you in that video.